Brad, thanks for having being on the show. So many areas to cover, as we were talking about before recording. The one area that I definitely want to learn more about is sleep. Right, I think it's like a third of our lives are spent sleeping. Your company focuses on this really exclusively. Maybe just kick us off. Like, what is the state today? Would you say of the world of sleep? Like, where are we today in terms of understanding why, how we sleep?
Well, first of all, thanks, Nectar, for inviting me to the podcast. Yes, sleep is it's a major area, and it's one that we're still discovering a lot of things at the sort of neurological level, the physiology of sleep. It's understood to a certain degree, but not necessarily deeply understood. Um, and it's probably one of the reasons why it's considered more of a new field, even if it's something that all of us need to do for about one third of our lives, and it's something that humans and all animals need. So it's there's still a lot of mystery in sleep. That said, there have been some really important discoveries over the years. One of the more interesting ones recently, and there was a TED talk on it, was the discovery of the lymphatic system, which is essentially the discovery that at nighttime, there's always the question of why. Why do we sleep? And one of the answers turning out to be that we need to clean out the brain. And so there's actually a system for clearing out uh, essentially the brain's garbage, taking it out at night. So that might not be, it's likely not the only reason we sleep, but it's an example of a fairly recent discovery, I'd say, in the last 10 years, showing that we're still learning a lot about sleep.
Yeah, like you said, the topic's been getting a lot of attention. Like books have been read. Like a lot of people are talking about, Matthew Walker's book, Why We Sleep, and seems to be getting greater attention. So, like, I know it's a difficult question, but maybe like, how early are we in just the overall understanding of the concept, right? So we're like, humans are not the only animals, obviously sleeping. So curious is like, are we like 5% really kind of really truly understanding the and being able to master this domain, or like,
Well, I think we're further along than that. I think we like the science is fairly well developed, and um, I don't think we can say with precision, if you sleep X number of hours, well, it will have this impact on your health. At this point, it does seem quite variable between different body types. It's really quite personalized, I guess. The need for sleep. There's certain parameters. The recommended sleep time is typically between 7 and 9 hours at night, maybe as low as 6 hours for people that are older. But the actual amount that you need to sleep or that I need to sleep is not determined precisely. But that said, I think there's a lot that we can do with the knowledge we already have in sleep, and so when we think of health, sleep is clearly one of the three pillars, along with exercise and nutrition. So there's there's enough knowledge that we have that we know that sleep is really important for us. It's fundamental for our physical and mental health, and there's enough knowledge as well to know what can be done if we're not sleeping well, and whether it's insomnia or whether it's other sleep disorders that are more, let's say, medical, like obstructive sleep apnea.
you've been running your company now, I believe, for 7 years, from what I saw on LinkedIn, and the topic's really, I feel in my mind, like, I don't have a study on this, but it's only gained popularity in the past 3-4 years. So it's like you've been toiling away in obscurity, but now it's like you guys just announced a raise and things seem to be going well. It's like one of these like overnight success stories. How did you get first interested, in this concept before obviously it was popular?
Well, I think sleep it's always been there. It's always been under the radar. And when I speak with people about sleep, maybe at first they're intrigued and they say, "Oh, that's interesting," and then almost always or inevitably, people will come back to me and say, "Oh yeah, you know what? After we spoke, I read this article, or I spoke with this person, or I realized that half the people in my family aren't sleeping well, or it's just been under the radar." I liken it a bit to where mental illness was 10 years ago. If you think about the workplace, I mean, it's still not an easy subject to broach, but I think we're a lot further along, at least in Canada, in many countries in the world, about talking about mental illness than we were, say, a decade ago, especially in the context of the workplace. Sleep doesn't have that same taboo, which is a big advantage. I think that's why we're going to move more quickly with it. But it's kind of being, in terms of knowing the impact that it can have on an organization, on people's health, I think we're still a bit behind where we are today with mental illness.
Yeah. Do your friends bug you a lot with like tips and recommendations? Like, well, what do you do, Brad? What's the best way? Any tips that you want to share?
They do. They do. It's not so much bugging me, but just sharing that it's something that's either affecting them or that it's affecting somebody that they know. I mean, it's really common. I think that's one of the first points in terms of educating the public about sleep disorders is that there are a lot of people that are struggling with sleep. So it's estimated that it's roughly 40% of people have insomnia symptoms in the general population. Over the pandemic, there were studies showing that had spiked beyond 50%. I guess periods of high stress, maybe with what's going on in the world with the economy and the war. There's a lot of sort of worries that people have, which I think are increasing the rates of insomnia symptoms. That's not quite the same as having chronic insomnia. So it's about 1/3 of those people with symptoms that have chronic insomnia, meaning that they're struggling getting off to sleep or staying asleep several nights a week and often over several month period. And that's, 1/3 of that is still 10 to 15%, which is a lot of people that are affected.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's almost like the question of what's your addressable market to a certain extent, right? Like it's pretty big. A lot of people are having issues. Maybe to rewind, excuse me, what's the inception story? So like walk us through the early days of Haleo Health.
So the way it got started was actually from an experience I had in the pharma industry. So I was working with an American pharma company in France. They had a French consumer over-the-counter medication company that was distributing this hypnotic. It was actually an antihistamine that didn't work very well as an antihistamine, but that they got approval as a hypnotic, as a sedative, to be distributed in pharmacy and that you could buy over the counter. And we would do no marketing, there's no communication around it, increasing the price every year by 10%. And we were still growing every single year to the point it was at about 8 million units a year by the time I left. And this is for a market of 65 million people. So it just gives you a sense of the demand that's out there for something that will help knock you out to go to sleep. And the problem with these products is that they're not meant to be used beyond a few days. It's not safe, and it's just not a good hygiene to be taking a medication to knock you out to be able to get off to sleep. And in many cases, it can create dependence or create tolerance. And so you're just making the problem worse over the long run, or at least not helping it over the long run for people that are really struggling with something like insomnia. So I think that was really the thrust of it. Is I started working on this product line, and I saw that this was one that we weren't paying much attention to, and yet when I'd speak with doctors and pharmacists and with consumers, there was such a need. There's so many doctors were getting so many people complaining about not being able to sleep, and they would prescribe them medication. Just again, turning to France and Canada is very similar. You had tens of millions of prescriptions of benzodiazepines and other drugs such as the zopiclone and zolpidem for a population of 65 million people. So you're talking about medicating a significant proportion of the population just to help them sleep. And so I could see that there was a real gap, a real need for a better solution. And this, despite the fact that there is a solution in cognitive behavioral therapy. So this is a form of psychotherapy that essentially changes the behaviors and thoughts around sleep and helps people get back physiologically and mentally into the right state to be able to sleep as they used to sleep before they had insomnia. So we have a solution, but it's not being used. What's being used is medication. And was really that opened my eyes to the potential of leveraging technology, particularly like virtual care type technologies, digital therapeutics, to be able to come up with a better solution.
Yeah, so why don't you walk us, if that's okay with you, Brad, walk us through the solution. So walk us what you guys do, your business model.
Sure. So essentially, the solution at the very beginning, when I first I left the farm industry and returned to Canada to start Haleo, was it was more of a screening solution, and that I wanted to distribute through pharmacies, because that's where I'd worked. I'd worked in pharmacy through pharmaceuticals and also through consumer packaged goods. So it was a channel that I'd had some experience in and I felt pretty comfortable with. But pretty quickly, I realized that the problem wasn't so much in letting people know that they had difficulty sleeping and that they should get help and referring them to a specialist. It was to find the specialist. There just weren't the specialists. In fact, I would later discover that the largest insomnia clinic in Canada is treating about 300 patients a year. So, for something that affects millions of Canadians, that's not going to be putting much of a dent in the problem. And so around 2016, after we had done some initial tests in the spring of 2016 with pharmacies, we made our first pivot. And this is when we were, and when I say we, it was myself. And at the time, I was working with our scientific director, Philip Stenstrom. And he and I were working with Desjardins Insurance in Quebec. We started talking to them about doing a pilot with their employees to do essentially to offer a virtual care solution where we would train some therapists on how to do this cognitive behavioral therapy for insomnia and do it completely virtually through at the time it was a desktop app. So this is in 2016. We got the pilot approved later that year, and we launched the program at the end of the year, screening thousands of employees and getting our first clients coming through the clinic. And it was at this time that Régine Denel, who's the founder of the Insomnia Clinic at the Sacred Heart Hospital in Montreal, so the hospital that's currently or was the biggest insomnia clinic in Canada, she decided to join on as our clinical director and was responsible for training the therapists and essentially developing the new protocol that we developed for virtual care. So that's essentially how it got started. Is that the business model initially was fee for service, where whenever somebody would come in, we would charge them for each session that they did with the therapist. The So that initial push into virtual care was very successful from an engagement standpoint. People were clearly interested in getting themselves screened for sleep disorders. So that was a first really important piece of information that we were able to get from this pilot. And the second thing was that even though there were some technical challenges, we were actually able to successfully treat people for insomnia using a virtual care protocol. So they didn't have to come into a clinic. Everything was done through a video conference with a therapist. And what was also interesting is that we had created a protocol that was shorter than what you typically would do. It would typically be 6 to 12 one-hour sessions with a therapist. And what Régine and Phil had developed was a protocol that was much shorter, where it was only half-hour sessions, and that you could do it in as little as 5. Sometimes it would take 6 or 7, but most people were finishing in 5. And we were finding that by combining the digital platform where we had screeners, like all the administration was taken out of it and held by the platform and dealt with by the platform, by taking all that out and just focusing the time with the therapist on the actual therapy itself, it was much more effective and people adhered to treatment. If you think about it, you were spending probably only like 80% less time than you would if you had to go through a regular clinic. And you're spending about a third of the therapist's time. It just meant that people were much more likely to adhere to their treatment because they had the support of the digital platform along with the therapist.
Okay, it's fascinating. So you pivoted the model, and then you, because of remote essentially or virtual, you're able to accelerate treatment. There's also, imagine, just the benefits of remote, of like maybe less anxiety of the person having to travel. You're able to do this, like not be in the same room. And I imagine, if I hazard a guess, when COVID hit, your business was inundated with people that, stressed out, were not able to come and visit in person. So I imagine that you guys hit an inflection point.
We did, and there was an important step before that. So that those first tests that we did were in 2016, 2017, and that was really honing the clinical aspect of it, and it was really positive. The screening and the clinical the interventions were very strong, and we were able to continue to improve them as the years went on. But what we saw is the need to make the product stronger, and that's where we well, I wouldn't call it a pivot, but we certainly needed to step up in another phase of the company, of going from a desktop solution that was just sort of a bricolage, like just putting together a whole bunch of different solutions, but in a way that wasn't that professional and user friendly, to a fully a mobile app that just had all of the different solutions all packed into one. And that was a big step for us. It took 2018 and into 2019 to complete that. And it's a good thing we did, because, as you mentioned, the pandemic came along in 2020, and that's really when we saw the growth in the company. When we went from having one very, very large client, that being the Desjardins Group, to suddenly having several large clients, that later included companies like National Bank and the University of Montreal, SAP Canada, Domtar. So these were all some really important additions that only became possible once we were able to morph the clinical solution into a user-friendly mobile app.
Yeah, it's interesting because it's a B2B model, right? So I imagine the vast majority of your business today is B2B. I imagine we could talk about future growth going directly to consumer, because I signed up online. I imagine I'm able to do it and pay it for the service. Is the business model then not, is it predicated on a number of users slash employees that a company is willing to offer? And then how does that business model work?
It's essentially a subscription model. So employers can choose to subscribe their employees, and we won't know which employees will come in when. But the idea is that the clinic is available to all employees, and that we let them know about it. And for some of them, it might just be doing the screening, using the app sort of for education on sleep and for tracking their sleep. So there isn't a need for an intervention. But for many of the employees, that certainly where we have the biggest impact in terms of a return on investment for the employer, is really with the interventions, the professional interventions, where we help people overcome a problem of chronic insomnia. And so that's the model. Is essentially it's a per member per month subscription for the employee population. And the secondary model that we have is a fee for service. So people can come into the clinic. Typically, the way it's done, though, is through a referral. Like a doctor will refer us, maybe from a sleep clinic where they treat obstructive sleep apnea, but they don't have a solution for insomnia. That's a large source of our fee for service referrals. We also get referrals from disability providers, where they have a program to get people back to work. And part of that is the person is having a lot of difficulty sleeping, so they come into the clinic, and we charge them a case rate for the disability client. So those are the kinds of models that we have. But the majority of our business is coming from subscriptions that we get from employers, that essentially opens up the clinic to all of the employees.
Do you see the software playing a greater role in the future? Is like, because right now I imagine it's the human element is obviously the key, it sounds like. Does the software have anything over and above, or is it simply just to empower the human to do more, be able to do it remotely, providing tips and tricks? But is there like a tracking element, or more data that you're capturing?
Yeah, the software I think will continue to play an integral role, and I think that that role will increase over time. And I think there's always going to be, at least, with what we know about technology today, that could obviously change in the decades to come. But people are, there's a really important influence from another human being when you're going through a change in behavior, like you are when you're trying to change thoughts and behaviors to improve sleep. So that notion of having a therapist, or whether you want to call it a therapist or a sleep coach or an expert that's with you, there's this notion of a therapeutic alliance, which is essentially grounded on safety and feeling safe about going through it. But there's also a really strong motivational component where it's motivating to have another fellow human being working with you on the process. You don't want to disappoint them. You you want to see success together with them. There's really a lot of proven links between you know between a professional therapy, or when you study professional therapies, and what they can bring. But on the other hand, there's also really the importance of measuring that. And just because a professional therapist is there doesn't mean it's working. You have to actually measure pre and post. So we use the technology to do that. Where the technology, I think, is going to help us go a lot further is in some of the things you just mentioned, of tracking, of self-guided solutions. Not everybody needs that therapeutic alliance. There are a lot of people, I would say a growing number of people, especially as coming, generations become more and more at ease with using technology and integrating technology into their personal lives. I think we're going to see more and more people accept digital therapeutics as a solution. So that's another example of something where the 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 solution may not just be sort of static, where you say, okay, well, it's going to be this. It could be a digital therapeutic to start, and if you're struggling, we can step you up to a professional solution with a professional therapist. So there's a whole host of different things or scenarios we can imagine in the future, but our vision of it is that it will be personalized. So it's going to be something that we're going to try to make highly accessible, so that anybody can get that help for a very nominal cost. Ideally, we'll find models where employers or governments can handle those costs and make sure that high quality care is available to as many people as possible. But also, I think when we think of like the highest standard of care, we'll want to be offering sort of what they call a stepped care approach in psychotherapy, which is going from education or self-guided solutions up to professional solutions on an as needed basis, so you can personalize the intervention.
Yeah, it's a very dynamic model. Hearing you speak about it, Brad, it's interesting because I feel there's many different avenues that you could pursue. And then if we talk about competition for a second, maybe I'm going to like start with a little preface, but it feels like you're going after a very specific segment of, let's say, your addressable market of people that have more intense sleep disorders or challenges with sleep, versus like tracking tools like a Oura Ring or 8 Sleep that are made much more for mass, less personalized, less dynamic, but obviously they're obviously growing. If you look at the amount of money they raised. So how do you think about competition? Do you see them as competitors, or you see it more as enablers of like, hey, this is actually benefiting a wider segment of the population than our core target market? So it's one of those like a rising tide floats all boats. Or do you see it, well, if they start capturing a lot of data over time, 8 Sleep has X amount of data points, maybe they can start encroaching on your territory as well. So yeah, curious to hear you on competition.
Yeah, well, I subscribe much more to the you know the idea that we're in a vast ocean here, and that the rising tide will raise all boats. I think that the work that Aura is doing, among others, is really raising the profile of sleep, and so that's just positive. And you look at all the wellness apps like Calm, and there's Happify. There's so many there's so many out there where they pivoted from being meditation apps to having a very significant sleep component, to them. And this is all of this is positive because it's turning people's attention to sleep. So this is how we view the competitive context. Um, we see ourselves as being in, I guess it's a niche, but it's still an area that A has high value because it's getting people to change. Like these other apps and devices may create change. I think they're definitely raising awareness. So when I use my Oura ring, I certainly get information on my sleep. Does it get me to change? It could, I guess, on maybe some very specific things, but I think there's going to be wide variance in the population between people who are going to actually make noticeable and durable change by using a wearable versus people that are going to use it and then lose interest. I think what we're focusing on is helping those people that have said, yeah, you know what, I'm ready to make the change, and getting them over the finish line with it. And I think that's today a much smaller part of the market, but that I think in the future will be quite a bit bigger. Just to give you an idea, the sleep apnea market, if you go back, say 30 years ago, not even 30 years ago, a company called ResMed went public. I think it was in 1995, and they essentially made the CPAP market, which is the compressed, the Darth Vader mask, the compressed air that's used to treat obstructive sleep apnea. And it was only a few years before that that the major medical associations recognized that CPAP was a treatment for sleep apnea. So it was this whole thing that people knew it was there. I mean, there was the famous stories of people dying in their sleep from, not stopping breathing and that. Well, today it's a massive industry, probably in the order of about $15 billion, and ResMed has got at least a quarter, if not more, of that market share. So, these are things that can be kind of a slow burn when you look at it month over month or year over year. But if there's a consistency in it, you actually see tremendous growth. And I think the same thing is going to happen for behavioral sleep health solutions for things like insomnia.
Yeah, it goes back to the point we are talking about before recording about like how early we are just in general health tech, and how these markets are so early, right? We're still in the embryonic stew, it feels like, of being able to build and understand our health. Speaking of this growth opportunity, you guys just raised a round, so congrats on raising that round.
Thank you.
What will use the money for, right? So is it signing more partners, growth, product?
Yeah, the first and foremost, it's in developing our commercial team. It was the last part of the team to develop. We'd always invested in the clinical team, and then we invested in the product team, which, to be fair, was more of a development team. I think that's where this round of financing is important for us, because we're really transforming from a development team to a true product team with an emphasis especially on design. Um, so I'd say the two biggest things that we're looking for to come out of this round are the commercial support to be able to expand. So we're available in Canada and now about 35 states in the US. And so we're using these funds to be able to develop marketing and customer success, but also a sales force that can go out directly to enterprise throughout Canada and North America. And then the second piece of it is really with regards to the product team and giving more attention to user experience and the design of the app. Because one of the things that's so critical in any clinical experience is that it be as easy as possible and that it be understandable, that people, that not be intellectual, but that people really know what they need to do. It's an interesting sort of anecdote that I've heard is that when people are going through a stressful period, and you could include trying to deal with an issue like insomnia in this, they actually their reading level goes down by 4 or 5 notches. So if you're at a grade 12 reading level, you may actually only be down at grade 8 or grade 7. when the stress is on from whatever it is that you're dealing with. And so it just reminds us that we need to be simple in our communication, and that we need to have an experience that is just intuitive, that doesn't, you don't want people stressing about things, because that every little roadblock means either an engagement that's lost, or a potential lead that's lost, or potentially even a customer in the clinic, a client that's lost. And so we're really working to make it as accessible as possible, so that people can come in, and when they come into our system, they feel taken care of, and that it's like it's an easy process rather than a hard one, because the therapy itself is not easy. It's you've got to make certain commitments, and there's certain restrictions to your sleep that aren't comfortable, especially in the first week or two. So the more we can do to remove other barriers around that, the better.
Yeah, like one of the slides I imagine your commercial team is building is when you're pitching an insurance company or a provider. It's like, hey, like here's the economic benefit of that we've seen with our existing customers, right? So it's like we've had X thousand or X hundred people use it, and they sleep better, which means you can translate it into like almost like an economic rationale. So it's like return on investment probably seems to be easy to do, I imagine.
It's actually it's not easy to calculate, but it is very evident that it's there, and it's probably conservative. It's probably being underestimated. So to give you an idea of the types of ways, or the ways in which sleep affects the employer, it starts with things like productivity, presenteeism. The studies and our own data show very clearly that the worse the symptoms of insomnia, the higher the levels of reported presenteeism. Same thing goes with absenteeism. And then there's replacement costs. If you've got to replace, say, a police officer who is absent, well, you need to not only pay for them to be absent, but also have somebody hired in order to take their place for the day. Then you get things like disability. Disability costs. Disability is significantly impacted by poor sleep. And this is where you tend to see the link between insomnia and depression and burnout and anxiety. All of these essentially drive up disability rates. There's medication, prescription medication. Again, we see this also in things like law enforcement, where you can have 25, 30% of the officers of the population on sleep medication, and that's not healthy, and it's because they're having to work nights and rotating shifts. They're just struggling to deal with this impact on their sleep. So you can really, you get a long list of different factors. I didn't mention accidents as well. Accidents and errors. Insomnia is a major driver of workplace safety incidents. So those if you compile all those costs, there is a major return. The tricky part is in measuring it. What we've done is we've tended to focus particularly on productivity, so presenteeism and absenteeism, because we do have a system that we've developed in partnership with a hospital in the U.S. to essentially fairly accurately measure the impact pre and post intervention, of the intervention on the productivity of the individual. And so there are ways to measure it, but it's one of those things that there's a lot of educating to do. I wish it was as simple as just saying, okay, well, here's what the studies show, and that's what would be bought by the client. But they're often asking for a lot of detail, a lot of information, which is what we provide through the program.
But it feels like you guys are building a big snowball, right? It's like at first it's really small, but over time you're just going to keep getting momentum and momentum. Where it's like the economic rationale and the reason to buy your solution, it's almost a no-brainer, right? Especially for an organization of a certain size, where it's like, hey, this we have 50,000 employees, and putting in we can improve the health and lives of 5% of them. That's a pretty big impact.
It is. It's a huge impact, and that's really what drives the team. Is that we know that what we're doing can make a big difference, and it's why it's been worth the wait. To It's not. It hasn't been easy to work, especially with some larger organizations, to go through the whole procurement process and the process of educating the management team on the importance and the pertinence of this kind of a solution. But to your point, is a snowball effect in that all the learnings that we get from those experiences, we're able to build on those, and that comes back to the raise. The idea is that we feel we've got enough experience now with the clients that we've developed so far to begin scaling this at a much larger level than we have up to this point.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Maybe a final question or two for you, Brad. What's the vision for your company? Like, how big do you want to take it? Do you think you can, you have go IPO, go public, or maybe partner with a larger health organization to be able to like extend your footprint? So, or just grow age groups, geography. Curious to hear about a broader vision.
Yeah, well, I would say in the immediate term, the big priority is making sure that we expand across North America. So we're aiming to complete coverage of the U.S. by the end of this year. And I would say another important priority is to make sure that we develop in certain target verticals. I think any organization can benefit from a solution such as ours, but there are some where it's just like a crying need. And one example I'd use are first responders. When you see the rates of insomnia, especially related to those that have to do shift work, they're extremely high, and we're talking about individuals that are responsible for our public safety. So, they have to make important decisions. It could be on a very regular basis, and those poor decisions can be very costly on many different levels. So, there are some verticals where it just only makes sense, and in fact, I would say there's an urgent need to do something about the issue of shift work and the impact it has on sleep. So that's one vertical. I'd put it broadly in first responders. I'd include transportation companies in that. You're running planes or trains or trucks. They're all very safety sensitive types of businesses or organizations, and again, there's no excuse for not taking care of the sleep health of those employees because of the risks that are involved. Another vertical that we work on are shift workers that aren't necessarily in safety sensitive positions, but where there are other implications, such as frontline healthcare workers. There may not be, it might not be safety to them, but it could be safety to patients as well, or medical errors that could happen, especially as people are completing long shifts. We've seen enormous amounts of burnout through the pandemic related to frontline healthcare workers, and so this is the kind of solution that can have a big impact. And then the final one I would say is with regards to high productivity. Anybody that is working in tech or in professional services, people that are earning large salaries. Well, as an employer, it's costing you a lot if they're not sleeping well. It may look like they're being more productive, but in fact, what you're likely getting is somebody that's on the verge of a burnout. So there could be very high disability costs, or it could just be in the quality of the work that you're getting. You're paying them to be productive, and if they're less than productive, then that's a major cost to the organization. So those are the three verticals. It's really the safety sensitive, the shift workers, and the high productivity that we're really aiming for, and we're aiming to try to do this at a North American level. That alone is probably going to consume us for the next 3 to 4 years.
Yeah, you have enough work, that in those buckets. I mean, it's a small personal story. My wife is a nurse, well, ex-nurse. Now she's in management at the hospital, but for a long time she was a neonatal nurse, like frontline, doing night shifts. I'd go drop her off at 11 at night, pick her up at 7 in the morning, and really messed up her sleep schedule, like especially working nights, and it took her a while to recover. So as you mentioned, yes, it's not just themselves, it's also their patients, right? So I think that just that vertical alone is huge, right, in terms of like just benefit to society.
Absolutely, we should talk after the podcast.
For sure.
I think that's exactly the kind of target that we have. are those kinds of workers. And like you say, there's many of them out there, and they're not getting much help as it is today with their sleep.
Yeah, Brad, this has been amazing. Keep up the great work. I guess final question I always ask is where people can learn, reach out, and learn about the great work you're doing.
Well, they can go to our website, so it's haleoclinic.com, or can reach out to me directly. We're on LinkedIn as well under Haleo Clinic. Um, those are probably two of the best places. The other thing is on our website we do have a blog where we're kind of keeping tabs on what's going on in the industry and in sleep in general. So those would probably be some of the best ways to reach us.
Awesome, Brad. Thank you so much for your time.
Okay, thanks, Nectar. Talk soon.